So backtracking back to the Middle East, to West Asia, and this ceasefire that's taking effect in between Israel and Gaza, Hamas. Uh, First of all, I don't expect Israel to abide by that ceasefire. They've never done so, going all the way back to 90s before that. Not only do they not abide by any ceasefire, but they try their best to kill off the negotiators that
Right.
are negotiating, including Ismail Haniyeh, a recent example. So I don't expect them, unfortunately, I hope the ceasefire lasts a long time, but thinking about it, I really doubt it.
Mm.
But again, I don't understand what options Israel has because they've tried for almost 2 years now, a year and a half, and they militarily haven't had success anywhere, whether it's um, Gaza or Lebanon or Iran or Yemen. Um, there's been a bit of success in Syria, but in long terms, we'll see who comes out benefiting from what's going on in Syria. But so if they haven't had that success until now, I just don't understand which path they're going to pursue. And from a Trump point of view, I think Trump will back them as far as they see them succeeding. But I don't think Trump has a lot of patience for failure, as he keeps saying he doesn't like losers. Um,
Right.
so I don't see what actual options that they have. But secondly, um, eventually, when this whole thing, the um, conflict, the military kind of conflict ends at some stage, whether that's it now or 6 months or a year or 5 years, whenever that is, Israel is going to have to face a new reality that it didn't have before. So how is it going to cope with that? Because previously, Israel in the Middle East was somewhat untouchable.
Yeah.
And also it had this kind of policy of escalation where it dominance of escalation where it can kind of escalate things far beyond anyone else in the neighborhood. But that's kind of reversed now. So first of all, Hamas has shown how the Iron Dome is penetratable, and that at any stage, if they're still around, if similar things happen, potentially they can attack again. Whether they'll do it or not, obviously that's a different thing, but they can. Iran, for the first time, has been attacking inside Israel and has demonstrated that Israel doesn't have the defense mechanism for that. Yemen, Hezbollah. So all these forces. So when it all settles down, Israel is going to be more vulnerable than it was before, and it's not going to be able to change that just by attacking here and there and everywhere. So
Right.
how are they going to cope with that scenario?
Gosh. One, I think we have to understand the Israeli government, the political circles, particularly, but also the media, social circles, their education system, as being similar to the Afghan Taliban, in the sense that the Afghan Taliban are willing to do whatever it takes to see their vision fulfilled. And if that means their people suffer and die, they're shut off from the world, so be it. And that's the way the Israelis see it as well. This is a historical, biblical aspect of how they view their Judaism, that they have always been a nation that has been under siege. It's always been a nation that has been opposed by all. That's always just been Fortress Israel. And so I think for many of them, the idea of that essentially occurring, as you were saying, essentially Fortress Israel, is in line with their beliefs, is in line with their expectations, is in line with what history tells them, both modern history and biblical as well as cosmic history. So it's reassuring to them that they're on this path. And we have to be very careful that we don't, again, with the Afghan Taliban as a good example, that we fail to understand that there are true believers out there, that there are people out there, there are people in power who are supported by constituencies who are motivated by their convictions. And this is something I think in the West, we are very cynical, maybe skeptical is a better way to describe things. I mean, you see Donald Trump in church. Does anyone really believe that he and his family have any interest in the gospel? Absolutely none. except for maybe the parts they can cite that somehow provide a divine mandate for his presidency. So understanding it that way, that, and then there are others too, maybe not those in Israel, the more centrist, if you want to call them, the Benny Gantzes, the Yair Lapids, the security focused ones, the nationalists, security focused ones, who view this as being necessary about building up these buffer zones around Israel, who have to feel that they have to always be on guard, are always manning the walls because they are civilization versus barbarism. Netanyahu is not in that camp, obviously. He's more in the religious reactionary camp, settler class camp. He said this over and over again when he spoke to the U.S. Congress over the summer. This is a war of civilization versus barbarism. And that is a belief that's held. And that's a belief held in American circles as well. Trump's generals that he had in power with him, General Mattis as Secretary of Defense, General John Kelly, his chief of staff, and General H.R. McMaster, who's his national security advisor, those were men who viewed the way in the same way. Again, an imperial mindset. They see themselves, those generals, as modern-day legionaries who have to be out in the borderlands defending civilization from barbarism, as well as being prepared to extend the empire. Not just defend the empire, but extend the empire. So those types of mindsets, I think, are important to keep in mind. We're not dealing with rational, reasonable, realist type thinkers, right? We're thinking about people who are motivated and who believe their convictions. Some of them, it may be cynical, but for many of them, it's not. And that's a mistake that we make at our peril if we don't appreciate that these convictions are true. It goes back to kind of what we were saying before about resistance. You saw that with the Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan, where, these people aren't fighting us because they're opposed to national liberation. They're opposed to they're in favor of national liberation. They're opposed to occupation. They're fighting us because they're being paid to fight us, or because they're part of a criminal gang, or because they're dead enders hanging on from the former regime. So if we just give them jobs or we build them wells, they will support the occupation, right? This fundamental misunderstanding of what motivates human beings, right? The natural order, the things that define us, motivate us, and of course are historical as well as natural. So those things, I think, are left out of our policy making very often, and certainly our media commentary on these things. The Israelis also too believe that they have the backing, and not believe, they know they have the backing of the United States. And so we haven't talked about the economics and all this, but you could have an Israel that has been downgraded 5 times by the credit rating agencies, right? That has seen, these numbers are old. This number is 6 months old. It's probably even more now. 40,000 businesses shut down, right? Where in October 2024, both their imports and exports were down by 1/3, on and on and on. We can run through all these different numbers to show just how Israel's economy is bleeding out. But the reality is they're backed by the United States. And in particular, they're backed by the American loan guarantees. So back in the 90s, the United States starts providing loan guarantees essentially to support the Israelis resettle Russian Jews into Israel. And this is mainly supposed to be for helping them build out housing and infrastructure and things like that. Of course, a lot of that then occurred in the West Bank, right, as settlements. But, these loan guarantees still exist. Yeah. And there's not a heck of a lot of money in that pot. Congress reappropriates it every year, $3 to $4 billion. Not a heck of a lot of money. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that the bond market, the securities market, understand that the Israeli debt that's being issued is backed by the Americans. It's guaranteed by the Americans. And that if a push comes to shove, the Americans will do whatever they need to do to fully support Israel. And this is why the Israelis over the last year have sold 400% more bonds than they normally do. Right. And this is how they keep their economy afloat. And so they know that as long as they have this lifeline from the United States, and as long as they're moving forward in accordance with the Zionist vision, as well as what both their modern and biblical history tells them, they are moving forward in the right direction. And so they're willing to be Fortress Israel. And there are many, many Americans who love the idea of Fortress Israel, who love the idea of Israel besieged among all sides, surrounded by their enemies. That's been a talking point in American politics for decades. The only democracy in the Middle East surrounded by their enemies. How can we not support them? Right. So, looking at this in a realist lens or a reasonable lens or a historical lens, you say this is madness. But looking at it from their perspective, it makes a heck of a lot of sense. Now, again, what they'll do next, we'll see. I also think the Israelis are very, very buoyed by the results of the last 6 months, where as they see it, they took Hezbollah off the battlefield. Now, Hezbollah may be returning to the battlefield in a week's time. We'll see what happens to the ceasefire. But the Israelis are very proud of that accomplishment, as well as they're very proud of what occurred in Syria. Netanyahu took a lot of credit for that. How much they were really involved, who knows? They're now on a collision course with Turkey. So, what they got in Syria now, they are on a collision course with Turkey. So it may, that may turn out very badly for them. But certainly, I believe they've checked Iran. Deterrence has been established on both sides. And we'll see what the Israelis do with Iran. Certainly, for the Americans, Iran is the white whale. And the Israelis certainly have that desire for the blood of the Iranians, desire to take the Iranian scalp, if you will. Just violence for violence sake, just like they did with Gaza. They'd like to do that with Iran, but they'd like the Americans to do that. And if the Americans do that, that gets back to the West Bank in the sense that the Americans attacking Iran take any pressure from Iran off of Israel, right? But the Israelis are also understanding this Iranian ballistic missile fleet can penetrate our air defenses. So they're checked to a degree. Right? Gaza, what will they do in Gaza? We don't know. Certainly, as you said so well earlier, their goals in Gaza, except just genocide for genocide's sake, they failed to meet. And of course, the West Bank being the priority, their main effort, how do they choose to carry out that annexation? When do they choose to carry it out? I mean, certainly if you're looking at the news in the last couple of days, it looks as if they're beginning those operations to do so. What will annexation look like? I think you'll see ethnic cleansing in the rural areas, in the towns and villages, what's called Area C, Area B to a degree. The cities will be isolated. They'll be left to kind of wither and die on the vine. And then places that the Israelis hate, like Jenin refugee camp, they will carry out vengeance upon. And I think that's what annexation will look like in a big macro kind of level. But they need a lot of troops for it, and they need a lot of forces for it. The Israelis are stretched thin militarily. And, one of the things that's interesting, I'll end this because I know I'm kind of on probably way too long, more of an answer than you probably wanted. But the Israelis have just recently decided to create 5 new brigades of troops, reservists, 38 to 58-year-olds. Right. Oh. So the idea being that you bring in these older men and women to man the checkpoints and to stand a post someplace or to drive a truck or do whatever, because you need the younger men and women to be on the streets of the West Bank, kicking in doors, shooting children, doing what the IDF does. And so they recognize that need for manpower. And you've seen that in statements from Netanyahu, from his cabinet officials, from the army about the need to shift to the West Bank. It's been called the silent war these last 15 months, nearly 900 Palestinians killed by the Israeli army in the West Bank, few dozen killed by settlers. And one thing that's, I think most people don't realize, the Palestinian Authority, the PA, has killed as many Palestinians, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, than the settlers have.
Hey there. I hope you're enjoying this episode. Let me just take a moment to introduce our sponsors for today. This episode is kindly being sponsored by the Worldwide Listings Company Limited, or WLC for short. WLC is a complete A to Z Amazon account management service. So if you're looking to start an e-commerce business, or you already have a business that you want to take to the next level, then get in touch and WLC will be able to help. Just for transparency purposes, let me also mention that WLC is a company that I personally created and am a director of. So when you get in touch with WLC, you will be speaking with directly myself or my team, and we very much look forward to speaking with you to see how we can serve your needs. Thank you. And with that said, let's get back to the episode.